When do you need to code custom Apex? There's really two overriding reasons. You want to create new functionality, or you want to change existing functionality. So generally, what you're doing falls into one of those two buckets. Now, in either of those buckets, you might have specific technical purposes. Like, for instance, maybe if you're saving a record, you first want to do a web service callout. The way that we do web service callouts is via Apex before you save the record to the database. So in that case, what we're doing is we're possibly overriding the save method to change its behavior. Or you might be doing something where you want to create an entirely new function. So maybe you want to create a new action to blast out some emails to some end users who haven't completed some tasks or something like that. So you want to create some sort of new user interface with a new action. So at the end of the day, whatever your reason is, it's either to create new functionality or to override existing functionality. All right. We access or we reference our custom controllers using the controller attribute on the page. We reference controller extensions using the extensions attribute. Every page can have at most one standard controller or controller, not both, but you can have as many extensions as you want. If you think about a person's interaction with a controller, there's a little bit of a difference between the initial first steps and then the subsequent steps. If you think about a person clicking on something like a button or a link, they're making that initial HTTP GET to request that Visualforce page. And so what we would do is upon that first GET for the Visualforce page, we then construct our custom controller, or for that matter, our controller extensions. At that point in time, we're going to, because we're instantiating the object, we call the constructor. We might do things like access the query string parameters to find out what the current record ID is, and do other sorts of initialization. Ultimately, we're going to populate the page that was requested. Usually the page is going to then call the getters in the custom controller code. It's going to populate that Visualforce page and then render HTML or produce HTML, return it down to the requesting web browser where it will be rendered. The next thing that usually happens is that a user then fills out a form. Okay? So the user enters in some data into a page, and they click on a button that submits the form up to the server. In that case, what happens is we first call our setter methods, and we'll show you this in a bit. So we take the contents of the form, we call those setter methods, and then depending upon what action the user performed, we call the associated action method. We execute our business logic, and then depending upon whether we had errors or something like that, we either keep them on the same page or forward them to some other page. Okay? So in general, that's kind of our life cycle of our controllers, which are at the end of the day classes which are instantiated into objects. So. All right, already mentioned this. So in our controllers, there are getters, setters, and action methods. So I'm going to walk you through creating all three of these. So the first thing that I'd like to talk about are our getters. All right, so it's a pretty straightforward model that we use in terms of a page calling getters in the controller. So if I have a variable in a page, so here I have my Visualforce page. So here's my Visualforce page, and then over here I have my Visualforce controller. Okay? So if I have something like a data binding, and I'm going to call this my var, so my variable. If I want to populate that variable in my page, what I would need to have in my custom controller code is a method called getMyVar. Okay? So it's a sort of a direct mapping between the name and the method name. So there's get my var. Okay, so this data binding here looks for a method with get of the exact same name. And so what this will do is return the data of the same data type. All right. Here is a simple example, or fairly simple, I guess, of a custom controller that has 3 pieces of data that it would return to the page. So one thing I would like you to do is to not worry or look at line 7. Okay, so now is everyone staring at line 7? All right. So don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. I will explain line 7 very soon, okay? So taking a look at our custom controller, you'll notice that there are 3 pieces of information that we are returning via getters, okay? So if I were to create a data binding expression in this, in a page that was requesting this, what 3 data bindings, using the curly brace exclamation syntax, could I display? So curly brace exclamation name, okay, what else? Account, but we can't display an S-object. There we go. So we could do curly brace exclamation account dot ID because we selected the ID from the database, and then curly brace exclamation account dot name, right? So you only get what you select from your SOQL queries. Okay? So that's the basic idea there. The thing about doing something like account dot name, we're using the exact same dot syntax that we use in Apex inside of our Visualforce page. The same object instance variable, dot, and then a member variable. We use that exact same syntax in the page that we use also within our controller. Once again, I'll come back to the Apex page's current page. So the opposite direction is when a user fills out a form and they submit the form up to the server. So in this case, what we do is we call a method, and that method is set my var. Okay. Now because we're passing data up to it, we also have a parameter here. So here we have value. So there's our value that we'd be passing up via that setter. Okay. So once again, pretty straightforward in terms of the way that that works. So let's take a look at a more complex example of a controller interacting with a page. Okay? So just so you know, here is the page. You'll notice that the page has this reference to the controller, which is the controller. And here's my controller, which is an Apex class over here. Okay? All right, so let's walk through this. So first of all, I want you to notice that there are 2 variables inside of the controller. And what is the default access modifier for member variables if we don't specify explicitly the access level? Private, exactly. So we have a private string called search text, and we have a private list of leads. Now that's not too big of a deal because we're implementing encapsulation. So associated with both of these variables, you notice that we have get search text, which returns search text. We have set search text, which is passed a string, and we set our private member variable equal to that. We also have a get results. So get results returns our list of leads down to the page. Now there is no set results, and the reason is that this is a search application that we're looking at. And so much like when you go to Google or Yahoo, you don't tell Google or Yahoo, here are the results. You give them the search text, they give you the results back, right? What we're going to do in order to get those search results is here on line 14, this is the mechanism by which we find the records that the user is looking for. So we are looking at what here? What is this called? SOSL. So this is a Salesforce object search language, and we know that because it starts with the keyword find, right? What it does is it binds to search text. It returns just leads, and it's going to return the name, the email, and the phone. Okay? All right, so let's go take a look at the page, and then we'll call the methods in our controller. All All right, so the first thing I'd like to point out is that we have our input text called search text. So this is the text box that the user enters in what they're searching for. We then also have a command button, and we're going to use this command button for action binding. So you'll notice that this is bound to a method called doSearch. Now, we saw doSearch on the previous page. Here, this public page reference doSearch, this is our action method. We haven't talked about action methods yet, but just so you know, action methods control navigation by returning page references. Okay? So that's how we know that that is an action method. All right, so what would happen is a user is going to fill out the search text, and we're going to post that up to the server after they click on our doSearch. So in the user filling this out, what happens is we call, first of all, we call set search text. I know that the user clicked on the button. You might think that the first thing that is called is the action method. The action method is the second thing that is called. We always call the setters first. In other words, we populate the data up there on the controller, get that ready to go, and then we call the action method that then usually works with the data that the user just submitted up to the server. So the first thing that's called is the set search text. So if I entered in, let's say I'm doing a search for dog, search text, my string is now set to dog. After that, I only have one setter, so after that's done, we then execute doSearch. What doSearch does is it binds to the value of search text, which is equal to dog. So we go search for dog, returning a list. This is returning leads. Now, you'll notice down here, we have two sets of square brackets. We have the square brackets containing our Sossel search, and I have a square bracket 0 square bracket down here. What is that referring to? So what's the return type of a Sossel search? A list? A list of lists of S objects. Okay, a list of lists of S objects. So if we take a look here, what this is doing is this is saying, since I'm only searching for leads, my list of lists is only going to contain one list. Therefore, I'm only interested in the first outer list. Okay? So I'm going to get back one list. Because the data type is a list of S objects, I'm going to cast this into a list of leads. All right? And I'm going to set results up there. Once again, my private variable set results equal to what I found by performing the Sossel search. Okay? All right, let's go look back at our page. So we clicked on the Go button, it performed the doSearch, and now it says re-render block. Okay? Now, one of the things that you'll notice on this page, we're implementing a special educational programming technique that I call ... And so somewhere in ... is something like an output panel or a page block with the ID of block. So notice on line 2, ... and notice on line 16. That doesn't actually work in the real world, but this is education, so that's what we do. Okay, so somewhere in there is a block. Take my word for it, okay?
So block is a component.
Exactly. So block would be the ID of a component. Exactly. Yep. So what we're going to do is we're going to re-render block. Let's just pretend it's pretty much the entire page. What it does is it re-renders the input text, and what it's going to do is it's going to call get search text. So it's going to return dog down to my page. Next thing it's going to do is it's going to go down here to this page block section, and here what I have is a page block table, and it's bound to results. So what we're going to do here is we're going to call get results. So let's pretend that we found 3 leads that contained the keyword dog. What's going to happen in this case is we're going to iterate over those 3 records. We are going to give a temporary variable name of L to each of those leads, and we're going to display the name, the email, and the phone. If we go back to our controller, you notice that those were the three things that we selected when we performed the SOSL search. Okay? So we'll get those fields back from our SOSL search. All right? There's also another thing going on here, and this is where it comes into play where, why do we call the curly brace exclamation expression syntax? Well, the reason we call it expression syntax is we can do just that. We can execute expressions. So you'll notice here that we have one of our formula functions, isNull. IsNull is checking to see, is results null? If it is null, this will return true. But notice this is bound to the rendered attribute, which is going to display the page block or not, depending upon whether or not this is null. Because if it is null, it returns true. If it is null, we don't want to display it, so we call not, which will flip it. So if we don't get back any results, we do not display the page block table. Okay? What we just showed you, in our Apex class, we were using encapsulation. So we had our protected private variables, and we had getters and setters in order to access those. And if we wanted to, we could embed other logic within those to do other things. Now, you'll notice that it sure took a lot of code to declare a variable like search text, to write the getter, and then to write the setter. It's a lot of code to write, 7 lines of code, just for a variable that you want to access and later possibly override the getter or setter, right? So one of the things that we have available within Apex are properties. And properties make it very simple or very efficient to define a variable with a getter and setter that we can alternatively override, okay? Let me start you off actually on line 3 down here. So a property is it's a little bit confusing if you haven't seen them before, because it's almost like a class definition, but it's almost like a variable definition, and yet it has method bodies. So it's kind of a, it's kind of a weird looking thing. But the idea behind these is that if we take a look at line 3, public double, we have a data type associated with this. Here's the name of the property, my read write prop. And then you'll notice that there's this body, and here I have get semicolon and set semicolon. And so what line 3 represents, it represents the same logic that we implemented over 7 lines back here, where we essentially had a declared variable with a data type, and we had a getter which simply returned the data, and we had a setter which set whatever was passed to it. So the advantage of using properties is you get that getter and setter, and then if you want, you can decide to override these. And so if we take a look at the top here, here's another example. We have this integer called prop, and inside here I could define a method body for my getter, and I could define a method body for my setter. All right? Now, just so you know, one of the things that we do, you'll notice here when I said set my var, I called my parameter value. And the reason is that value is a default, it's a default parameter available to you, and this represents whatever was passed to the setter. So anytime you want to access, using a property, access whatever was passed to the setter, the default name of that property is value, okay?